It is said that gentlemen don't sail to weather, and indeed, the kind of circumnavigation I made is specifically designed to take advantage of following winds and waves by staying in the southern tropical southeast trades most of the time in the South Pacific, the South Indian, and the South Atlantic Oceans, and then the northeast trades up to and through the Caribbean. However, there were places and times that I wanted or had to beat back upwind against these trade winds, and here are 8 such instances in chronological order. Sea change was a heavy boat to start with, and with all my extra gear did not help. Plus, the 30-year-old sails were already rather bagged out at the start, let alone the end. I also had lots of weight in the bow in the form of both my main and spare anchors, and especially their chains, plus my heavy dinghy and rolled-up spare dinghy on the foredeck, and lots of weight in the stern, with both outboards on the stern rail, plus the stern anchor and its chain, 3 solar panels on the bimini and lifelines, and the big hurricane anchor and 5 batteries in the port lazarette. And then there was the extra windage of my yellow surf ski on the starboard foredeck and the Dodger, bimini, and solar panels. Plus, for the second half of Season 1 and most of Season 2, multiple lines backing up the standing rigging. My first attempt at an upwind bash was the well-known situation sailors find themselves in when arriving in the Marquesas. Before COVID and today, one could check in at Hiva-Oa, the second most southerly island. Then the only upwind bash required was 45 miles at a fairly good angle to the most southerly island of Fatuhiva, with its famously spectacular anchorage in the Bay of Virgins, shown here from the web. Cruisers before COVID, and perhaps still today, would commonly avoid this upwind bash by stopping illegally at Fatuhiva on their way to check in at Hiva-Oa, apparently risking a fine, although I never met anyone who was actually fined. When I sailed in 2022, French Polynesia was open after COVID. However, they required that all yachts check in at Tahanea Bay on the northern island of Nukuhiva. My timing was that I would arrive too late to check in on Friday afternoon, and the gendarme office was closed on the weekend. So I headed south to Hiva-Oa, but did not anchor, let alone go ashore, and instead then sailed past it and several other islands over the weekend. First going northwest past the remote, inaccessible rock of Fatuhuku at sunset, then after sleeping at sea Saturday night, turned back southwest past Uahuka and close to Uapu'o, before heading to Nukuhiva on Sunday. After 3 weeks on Nukuhiva, mostly in Tahanea Bay, with 1 week at the beautiful Hakatea Bay, also known as Daniels Bay, on Monday, May 23rd, I tried to sail back upwind towards Fatuhiva, using full jib, staysail, and triple reef main. But as darkness gathered, it became apparent that I would not be able to safely clear the first island of Uapu'u, in part because there was also a considerable current setting us westwards. While I could have run the engine to help clear the island or tacked away from it, I realized it would be at least a 2-day continuous bash to fight the 125 miles upwind to my goal of Fatuhiva. So instead, I bailed and bore off for a wonderful 5-day, 500-mile beam reach to the Tuamotus, during which this picture of us under full sail was taken by a fellow cruiser, Scott, on his AML Super Maramu named Tenge. My second and more successful upwind bash occurred in the Tuamotus. After spending 2 weeks in Fakarava Atoll, the first with Christina and Erica visiting, the second alone, I decided I wanted to visit the upwind atoll of Tahanea, which is 50 miles away, reputed to be one of the most lovely and largely uninhabited atolls. I had a forecast of a trend of the trades towards east-northeast that would assist me, so decided to go for it on Monday, June 20th in 2022. The South Pass on Whakarava faces directly south, so I even had the jib unfurled as I motored out the pass around 9 a.m., then raised most of the main and added the staysail as we needed the power to punch through and over the waves from the east. Well, it's Monday, June 20th, and we are pounding our way upwind from Whakarava towards Tahanea, but first we need to clear the atoll in front of us, Fiji. We're not going to make it because the wind has gone back to the east a little bit from northeast. We are pounding away into the swells which knock us back, and we have the current taking us sideways. And so a little while here we will tack. Whoa, here's a nice one. And I went over that smoothly. Every now and again we hit one hard and come almost to a complete standstill, which doesn't help. But so it goes. Here's Fiji for what it's worth. By midday we were approaching the next south atoll of Fiji, despite my best efforts to clear it, in part because we surely also had some current flowing west as shown here, so had to tack onto starboard, sailing almost due north. I called the ley line to tack back to port headed southeast at sunset and prepared for a long night with little sleep, both because of the rough ride and because I set my alarm for every 2 hours to make sure we were on course, as I was using the wind vane to steer. After a slight loss of angle when the breeze briefly bent southwards, we got a break as it bent back northwards, and we were lifted enough to skirt the most northerly projecting point of Tahanea by half a mile and eventually reached the 3 passes on the northeast side by dawn. Note the roughly 120-degree tacks on the upwind beat. I spent 4 wonderful days in Tahanea, and our track back to Whakarava was a gentle downwind sail on 3 broad reaches. My third major upwind bash came after I checked into Fiji at Savu Savu on the south side of the second largest island of Vanua Levu on the north side of the archipelago. From there I had a long motor upwind to reach lovely Bream Bay, and then on through the Somo Somo Strait to the northern tip of the next large island called Taviuni. A hard upwind motor sail then took me to Matagi Island, but here I focus on the next day, Thursday, September 15th, when I left in 3 a.m. in the dark and used the engine to assist in sailing upwind to Wailagilala Island at the northern end of the eastern Lau group of islands, which I would later sail down southwards. To complete this 40-mile beat in daylight, I had to use the engine to assist, and hence achieved 3 roughly 90-degree tacks, getting in at 5 p.m. The relatively straight line crossing this track is my return path from Tonga the next year. The next clip is from the earlier upwind beat to Matagi, but it gives an idea of the conditions, although to perform even better, I also raised the main to third reef 2 days later. Okay, we're bashing our way up to Matagi Island, which is up over there, beautiful little crescent island that we're going to... Upon my return to sea change in Vunda Point Marina in Fiji in August 2023 for my second season, having been delayed by left shoulder rotator cuff surgery and recovery, I decided to fight my way back to Tonga, a renowned cruising area, having been forced to sail past in 2022 as Tonga was still closed for COVID and also recovering from the devastating Hunga Tonga volcanic eruption and tsunami in January 2022. As is clear from this image, a direct course from Vunda Point Marina in Fiji to the southern island of Tonga would be straight into the prevailing southeast trades. So I waited for a favorable window involving northerly breeze to take me out of Fiji that was forecast to back to west, south, east, and finally northeast, allowing a curving course towards Tonga for the first 3 days. which, as described in my video on roughest nights, led me into a very rough start to the passage, but eventually played out as hoped. Then a front came through from the southwest, backing to south, allowing a steady course further southeast for 2 days. Even with the wind continuing to back to the southeast, from there it would have been a fine 2-day sail to Tonga, albeit mostly beating, but without having to tack upwind. However, I realized I was only 100 miles north of Minerva Reef, a famous stopover reef in the middle of nowhere, frequented by boats sailing from Tonga or Fiji to New Zealand in the southern spring or back in the southern autumn. So I decided to try to get there, but that involved beating directly upwind in fairly rough conditions. My initial attempt was a disaster, spending a day on port sailing southwest, followed by tacking to starboard, only to discover that the tack was through 180 degrees. At 2 p.m. on Wednesday, August 23rd, I turned on the engine and sheeted the jib and staysail inboard, and the improvement in angle to the wind is obvious, followed by a long overnight tack on port and a final tack into Minerva Reef on starboard just before sunset, for a total motor sail of 16 hours. Here is our position 50 miles out, on course for Minerva Reef, and the following clip is from that night. It's 2:30 in the morning, and we are just 30 nautical miles from Minerva Reef. I'm cuddled up here in my red towel and my grey hoodie, my safe place in the cockpit, and we're having what I call a non-squall come through. It's blowing hard. The previous squall, non-squall, knocked down both of the auxiliary solar panels on the sides here, and you can see the wind vane is working really hard to keep us on course, but we're doing great. We're pointed straight at Minerva Reef. We'll be there tomorrow sometime. Here is the predict wind view of our track to Minerva Reef, with the prevailing southeast trades now dominant, and our entry through the pass and then anchorage on my iSailor chart. Although Minerva Reef is a wonderful place, as shown by this view from the masthead, sadly it was not worth the effort, as I could not get the outboard on my dinghy to run properly, later diagnosed as a clogged fuel cock, so could not explore it, and in the absence of anyone else in the reef, plus the relative cold of midwinter, I left 2 days later without doing more than some repairs, but did get this great overhead shot of sea change. From there it was a glorious 3-day close-reaching sail to Tonga, which indeed turned out to be a wonderful cruising ground after this 11-day interrupted passage. My 5th long upwind beat was on the commonly difficult 1,000-mile passage from Fiji to New Zealand in early November 2023. While major weather models now extend for up to 10 days, which is what most cruises take for this passage, they are really only reliable for the first 4 to 5 days, which was perfect for a 60-foot carbon fiber catamaran named Marquesas I met in Wunderpoint Marina, shown here from the web, whose crew made a beeline south and took exactly 4 days, just beating the remnants of Cyclone Lola, in part by using the 2,000 liters of diesel I watched them load whenever their speed dropped below 12 knots. Less fortunate was a solo French sailor who was caught in Lola and rescued from his battered yacht, which was then lost just north of New Zealand. In stark contrast to Marquesas, I took 14 days, the longest of anyone else I met, as indicated by the green dots on my predict wind track, which indicate posts to my blog, which were usually made in the early evening. This long passage was mostly because, after a rough night sailing south out of Fiji followed by messy conditions, I decided to bail to New Caledonia and sail due west for 2 days. This was to avoid headwinds as well as Cyclone Mal, which had formed up north in Vanuatu. But Mal passed harmlessly behind us after sideswiping Fiji, so I turned south again and endured 6 days beating upwind on port into southeast trades, varying from weak to strong with occasional squalls. For the first half, it seemed I was destined to go to Norfolk Island. The final day was Saturday, November 11th, when we survived several squalls, but late in the afternoon I failed to furl the jib before the final squall, and it tore in half across the middle of a panel. After that, I had my longest pure motor across a high-pressure ridge, followed by a fast sail in northerlies and westerlies back southeast to New Zealand. The first clip here gives an idea of how noisy it was in the cabin at night during these 6 days, making sleeping difficult in addition to the rough motion. Then a view of the cabin when beating upwind like this for almost a week. Then the squall at the end of which the jib tore. Well, this is what the boat looks like when you're living at 25 to 30 degrees. Just stuff piled up front, all the heavy things on the floor up front there to stop them hitting me. You see the angle of the dangle on the towels there. Have to hold on all the time. Various clothing on the port bunk here. Here's my bunk. Using a sheet at night. There's the nice warm socks, my books, computer, and the galley, of course, is a mess. Haven't cooked for a couple of days now. And whoa, it's almost 40 degrees there, right there. And yeah, got to brace yourself and hold on all the time. And oh gosh. We are in the middle of an intense squall. We have the triple reef main, staysail, and unfortunately the full jib. It didn't occur to me to partially furl it before this hit. We're heeled over at 45 degrees with water coming over into the cockpit, and it is absolutely deluging. Holy smokes! This is the first rain we've had in an awfully long time. Wow. Okay. Let's hope we survive it. Luckily, I was able to furl the jib until the calm section where I replaced it with the Genoa. And here is the torn jib on the quarantine dock in Opua. My 6th intense upwind bash occurred in New Zealand, where, having checked in at Opua, I sailed south to Whangarei Bay. On the last day, Friday, November 24th, I had a forecast of westerly wind starting light and building all day, so left Whangaruru Bay at dawn for the 30-mile sail to Bream Head, before I would have to beat upwind across Bream Bay and into Whangarei Bay. These images are from my PredictWind tracker, which not only updated only once an hour, but also sometimes suffered weird GPS glitches, which yielded the aberrant lines emanating from Marsden Cove. After a slow start, I made excellent progress southeast along the coast, 1 to 4 miles out to sea to lessen the gusts coming off the land, but not far enough to suffer significant waves. As we approached Bream Head at the north end of Bream Bay, the wind turned to southwest, which would be on the nose. So I motor sailed up into the lee of Bream Head to reef the main to third, furled the Genoa to a quarter, having left my torn jib in Opua with a sailmaker, and sheeted the Genoa and staysail inside the shrouds, then headed out into the obvious chaos of Bream Bay, with perhaps 25-knot wind on the nose and steep, sharp waves from the 8-mile fetch across Bream Bay. I resorted to 1,800 RPM for motor sailing and even then it was a really tough wet beat south for about an hour, followed by calling the ley line to the entrance to Whangarei Bay past Busby Head, which took another hour and a half. And as shown in this detailed view of my ice sailor track, I would not have made it without another tack, but for a slight favourable wind shift halfway. We scraped past Busby Bay by about 100 metres and sailed up to Marsden Cove Marina at sunset. Later that night, a large catamaran arrived on the quarantine dock directly from Fiji, and the next morning told me the beat across Bream Bay was the toughest part of their entire passage. As was often the case, I did not try filming in such stressful circumstances. Apart from other considerations, I did not want to get my vulnerable iPhone 8 wet. So this short clip from earlier in the afternoon gives some idea of the conditions, but not the waves in Bream Bay. Our conditions have gotten pretty crazy here. It's way more than forecast. There's a harbour in here called Tutukaka that I was going to go to, but I think I'm going to push on to Whangarei. My seventh tough upwind bash was at Tanna Island in Vanuatu during my third season in 2024. I had to check in at Lenakal on the western side, but my objective was Port Resolution, a large bay named by Captain Cook, on the eastern side where I wanted to visit the active volcano called Mount Yasur. I knew this would be a rough bash, as the southeast trades were blowing hard, the waves were big, and there would be current against us. So I led the half-furled jib and staysail sheets inside the shrouds and used the engine at 1,500 RPM. Leaving early in the morning on Friday, May 24th, I beat southwest on port for 2 hours, then called the ley line to the southern tip of Tanna and tacked to starboard for 3 more hours beating due east, only making the point because we got a lucky 5-degree favourable wind shift. Unfortunately, I no longer have the iPhone I was using for my ice sailor chart that day and stupidly forgot to take a screenshot of it. So my predict wind tracker will have to do, but its recording only once an hour fails to capture our track accurately. This clip gives a sense of the conditions. Friday the 24th of May, and in my demented state I decided to have a shot at sailing around the south end of Tanna Island, try to get around to Port Resolution to try to catch the volcano tour today. And it's crazy rough. We have been beating our brains out for 5 hours now. We've got an hour to go. I mean, just look at this. Oh, man. And we can only do it because we have the motor running. It's hard to see, but there's the point that we have to get around. Show it up there. And we wouldn't have made it except that we got a 5-degree wind shift right when we needed it about 15 minutes ago. But I mean, it's a gorgeous trade wind day, but you want to be running downwind in this, not beating against it. Aye. It's 12 o'clock now. Left at 7 this morning. Oish, oish, oish. My reward was the lovely, peaceful anchorage in Port Resolution and a trip to the Mount Yasur volcano, which did not disappoint. Volcano, thank you. Wow. We get a good one right at the end. Awesome. It was a full year and 2 oceans later before my 8th long beat upwind, which was actually a whole series, painfully familiar to sailors in the Caribbean, sailing north against the northeast trade winds that howl between the Windward Islands from Grenada to Martinique. I was able to make most of these inter-island crossings using engine assistance without having to lead the foresails inside the shrouds, but made a mess of the one between Bequia and St. Vincent, in part because of the strong current flowing west between the islands. This screenshot from a video several days later, when I was headed on north, shows the two tacks at horrible angles required to lay the Blue Lagoon Marina on the southern tip of St. Vincent. This was my mistake for not leading the foresails inside the shrouds on this crossing. Here is a short clip. Wow, it's been a pretty rough bash today coming up to St. Vincent here. I'm not even going to lay Blue Lagoon, I'm going to have to tack and go up. There were many other instances where I beat upwind, sometimes on long complicated passages like the one from Mauritius to South Africa under Madagascar, or getting into awkward anchorages or marinas. But these are the 8 that remain etched in my memory, and I am extremely grateful that sea change held up through them all.